The Wiggly Podcast, bringing your garden to life.
Well, we're in the sitting room for number 15 podcast, aren't we, Rich?
Well, 15 already. Incredible, isn't it?
No pickies this week, but you can follow our show notes at Heather's blog, wigglywigglers.blogspot.com. What's on this week's show? Well, we've got Monty's Wormcast coming up.
Great.
Rob, who works with Al on the wildflowers, says that they've been able to look at owl pellets so closely that they can see the worm bristles in them.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
He's a font of knowledge, isn't he, Rob?
He is. We've got our second Skype interview, and that's with Jane Peroni. She's the deputy editor of The Guardian Unlimited, which is The Guardian's website.
Right.
But her claim to fame in Wiggly World is she has one of the best gardening blogs, in my opinion, in the whole country.
Right.
Al's coming in with a plant which smells a lot sweeter than Phil did last week. Welcome, Phil, this week. He's freshly bathed, I feel.
Cleaner.
Well, a bit cleaner, anyway.
Yeah. And we're going to talk to Phil about the entry-level stewardship scheme and how that should benefit food production and the environment in farming.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think we'll have to go back a little bit to find out why farmers get money for nothing.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So we better start with the show.
Okay.
And you and I are going to talk about fishes.
Here we are, my fave subject, fishies. There's a little pond in your village, isn't there, Preston on Wye?
Yes, right by the church, which we lit up for our play, A Christmas Carol. There is a pond. By the way, Christmas Carol, I must say, well done, Clive as Scrooge.
Right.
He was
Got to
talking, and I forgot to say that
last week, yeah.
Clive Dale, megastar Scrooge. Well done, boy. The pond, just outside the church, when you travel down there in the evening, there's the most amazing sight. The whole thing moves. First of all, you think, oh, it's just waves. But when you look closer, it's completely silvery, wiggly thing.
Yeah.
And it is just a mass of this thing.
Yeah.
And everyone shone their lights on it and said, wow!
Yeah.
What are they?
They're bleak. Now, there's all sorts of little fishies in that pond, but those shimmering sprat-like fishies that freak out when the lights go across the water are bleak. Hundreds of thousands of them in there, aren't there?
I don't know, but it seemed like hundreds of thousands.
There are. I think there pretty much are hundreds of thousands. They're only small fishies. They only sort of get to, 5 inches long. And they're a really important fodder fish for some of the predators that live in the river and avian predators as well.
And why is there so many in such a small space?
Well, they go in there because it's like a place where small fish can spend their winter. It's a safe refuge for fish to spend their winter because it's on a small tributary that goes into the Wye. And since that pond's been cleaned out, it's relatively easy. Well, the river comes up in spate and those small fish can move into the sanctuary of that tributary and they all end up milling around in that small pond. So it's a great place for them. It's safe from cormorants, say, for instance, who are decimating stocks of fish on the Wye at the moment. And it's also safe from the heavy flows of a winter spate river.
Because when I first met you, one of our areas of common ground was that particular pond, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's funny, wasn't it? Because I said, we were talking about church and the pond and whatnot. I said, I sometimes pop down there and get some bait when I go pike fishing. He said, did you? He said, have you got permission to go down there?
That's right.
I said, oh, yeah, and it's one of the rare instances I did have permission to go somewhere. But yes, it's a great place for my part. As a keen angler, I can pop down there and catch half a dozen fish for bait.
And from our point of view, we regard it as the village pond.
Yeah.
And it's certainly been maintained over the years much, much better. In fact, in a former life, I cleaned out the pond and I must tell you that it was full of eels. Which we had a lot of fun putting on Dangle's seat.
Yeah.
But we'll leave that there.
Eels are a species in decline as well, unfortunately, on the river. Actually, I must tell you, I went fishing on Sunday afternoon for a couple of hours. I just went down the river for a couple of hours. And as I walked down to the river, George, my little terrier, was in front of me. I couldn't pull him back, couldn't get him back. And he walked down to the bank of the river, and there were 2 kingfishers sat there, and they were really communicating with one another in much the same way as they do in the spring, if they're mating, they're chit-chat, chatting each other up and whatnot. And they were really communicating with one another, and they weren't paying any attention to me. And I was as far as I am from Phil now, probably 3 yards away. And they paid no attention to me whatsoever. So I walked up to the bank, couldn't get George back. George was really looking down to the river as well. And as I walked up to the bank, there was an otter. And it was just under the surface of the water amongst some sticks and looking up at me. And obviously the kingfishers were chattering about the otter being there. because he was obviously fishing away. And eels, of course, are one of the prime food sources and favourite food sources of otters.
Is that the first time you've seen an otter? Because they're pretty rare, aren't they?
They're rare, but they are coming back. There are issues with otters coming back and recolonising rivers, because really we're in a situation now, there's lots of commercial fisheries, and otters can cause real problems on commercial fisheries.
But they are
lovely, but again there's a balance to be had. Last 5 years I saw a pair of otters probably 3 miles away from where we are now. I saw another pair of otters on a stretch of the Wye below the Carrots, which is just outside of Herefordshire, where there was a nest of bee-eaters. Do you remember that story about bee-eaters last year?
Yeah.
I saw a big dog otter, probably about 5 miles from here, about 3 years ago. And then I saw that guy the other day.
That's amazing.
Prior to that, I've seen an otter a couple of times on the tour in North Devon when I was a kid, when I used to go fishing on the river down there. But otters were decimated, really, and they were kind of wiped out. Again, it was bad river water quality, lots of pollution causing problems, loss of habitat, and of course lots of food.
So, because they're back, things must be better.
Yeah, the water quality is definitely better. I think people are more conscious of managing the rivers properly, leaving habitat, not clearing out fallen trees from the side of the riverbanks. You know, I mean, even now, wildlife trusts and different organisations get funding to make otter halts by the side of tributaries on main rivers and whatnot. So they're definitely coming back.
And you're a keen fisherman, aren't you?
Yeah, passionate
How
about
are you
fishing.
going to justify that to me, Rich? Because there must be lots of listeners who are thinking, oh, I don't think you should do that.
Yeah. Well, fishing is brilliant because it's one of those things, it's not just a pastime, it becomes part of you, really. I grew up fishing. I started fishing when I was a little tiny kid, and now it really is almost part of me. If I don't go fishing, it does affect my mood. Obviously don't go as much as I'd like to.
Have you been this week at all?
But, no, I'm going Saturday, all day Saturday, dawn till dusk, so I'm looking forward to that. But your dad used to go fishing, didn't he?
My dad loved fishing.
Yeah.
There's all different types of fishing, but he was particularly keen on salmon fishing, and of course loved eating salmon. And you eat your fish, don't you?
I eat some fish, certainly. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do is go fishing. If you catch a couple of trout, take them home and feast on them, have guests over. And I like fishing for bass in the summertime off our coasts, and they taste really nice. Just take a couple of fish for the table, that's all you need, and I think there's nothing more natural than being able to do that. And
so have you been fishing for those bleak?
Yeah, there's bleak, and interesting enough, going back to the pond at Preston, there's all sorts of fishes in there, They've got bleak, and there's chub and dace and perch and roach and gudgeon, and there's one day I was down and I caught this little trout, and this old farmer boy, whose name I won't mention, but who he came waddling out of his farmyard and looking at me with, in a slightly suspicious way, and he sort of said, all right. And I said, yeah, all right, how are you, all right? He said, yeah, well, not so bad. What are you doing here then? I said, just catching a few fishies for some pike fishing bait. He said, oh, right. And just as I was talking to him, caught a little trout. Just bearing in mind, this pond is tiny, but there's all sorts of fishies getting there. So I got this trout, and I said, would you like a trout? He said, well, I'll be all right. Yeah, I wouldn't mind at all. So I gave him his trout. No, my Herefordshire accent perhaps isn't as good as it should be. I gave him his trout, and we've been friends ever since.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, that's lovely, and we must talk more about fishes. But you've just been writing some instructions this week, haven't you, on habitat?
Yeah.
And I was thinking that it's probably the best moment to put up your nesting boxes.
Yeah.
And we've actually got an article or a mention in Country Living's magazine with a nesting wreath, so all the little bits and bobs that you can pick
they're brilliant
for the birds.
Yeah.
So tell me where you should site your nesting box.
I think the most important thing about a nesting box is one of the most important things is that it faces away from the prevailing conditions. So if you imagine, really, when you provide habitat boxes, animals are very much like us in that they're looking for a nice, cosy, safe, sheltered place to make their nests in. So nesting boxes need to face between north and southeast. That's a good rule of thumb. So if you can point that nesting box facing that direction, that's ideal. You can put nesting boxes on trees or on the walls of the house. Often people don't think about putting them on the walls of the house, but that's often a really good place, especially for sparrows, to nest. So if you've got one of the walls on your house that faces that direction, that's ideal. And then between sort of 3 and 5 metres up
Should you put nesting material in there ready for them? Or not?
No, it's not worth doing that because
Yeah.
birds have a natural propensity to build their own nests anyway. So they'll find a suitable void and that's what they'll make their nests in. It's sensible to put those nesting wreaths, other suitable material that birds could forage and pick up for their nests in the proximity of a nest box.
Yeah.
That's going to save them some time to forage for suitable nesting material.
And now's the moment.
Now's a good time. I think National Nest Box Week is the 14th to 21st of February.
Valentine's Day.
That'll be a really good time. Put a nest box up if you're looking to encourage birds to nest in the spring.
I got a fab corny wiggly advert. For bird lovers everywhere. Buy your nest box here. Sorry.
Where'd you get that from? Where's that from?
It came in my head just then.
Oh, did it? Oh, well, there you are then.
There.
Yeah.
Right, thank you, Richard. Farmer Phil's just come in. Hello, Phil.
Hi, Hev. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Phil.
I must tell you both that the Times Online website has just brought out an article, and it's called Peas in a Podcast. Isn't that sweet? And it's by Madeline Acey. And guess who it's all about?
No idea.
You two. And me. Peas in a Podcast.
Really?
It is.
No way.
Have a look online, Times Online.
Oh, brilliant.
Phil, you've come in this week, and I know that you've been scratching your bonds, trying to fill in a few forms.
Well, just for a change, I know you give me a lot of jip about my form filling, but I've got some more forms to fill in, and so yes, I have.
I do give him a little bit of stick, and the other farmers in the pub, because they moan about filling in the form.
Yeah.
And I say, if I filled in a form to get me £30,000,
Be
I'd
great.
be well happy,
Great, wouldn't it?
and
Yeah.
you wouldn't hear me moaning about that
Yeah, that's
form.
right.
But I'm sure Phil's going to put us right on all that, because he wants to explain subsidies, how they work, why we're doing them, and are farmers getting something for nothing?
Have you got about 10 days?
Well, we will make it into a series, darling.
I think there's definitely some mileage in
Yes,
it. Yeah.
and no moaning. We can't have moaning.
No moaning farmers, no.
No.
Phil's not a moaning farmer.
I
no.
was going to say, I'm not on the whole a moaning
No, he's
farmer,
not,
so
no.
You
that's,
never see a farmer on a bike.
that's because it's too much like hard work.
Yeah, and he nearly got on his bike just after Christmas, but not
No.
quite.
Oh, God. He needs to, though, doesn't he?
He
Yeah.
certainly does.
I decided that I'd finished the mince pies, so I didn't need to get on the bike.
Oh, well, yes, perfectly sensible.
He does have exercise every day, so he takes
Really?
Monty to the bus stop.
Yeah,
Then
right.
he comes back. I cycle to meet him.
Yeah.
So it depends if I go fast, whether I can do 6 or 8 miles.
That's very coordinated, isn't it?
It is. And then he lifts my bike into the back of the truck when
Right.
we go home. So there's his
Excellent.
exercise
Yeah, there
every
you are.
And what a physique I've got to show.
Yeah, Phil's upper body strength is absolutely amazing, isn't it? It is amazing.
Staggering. Right. Okay, so Phil, the ELS. Give us the briefest background on that, and then we'll go back in time to know why the heck we've got to this point.
Very briefly, that subsidy reform within the EEC has come up with the latest system, which is based on the idea that farmers have to do some environmentally beneficial work on their farms in order to get some of their money. So where historically we've been paid a subsidy to grow wheat or barley or whatever, they've now decided that a percentage of that money we will only get if we fulfil certain environmental criteria. So, simple example is that the maintenance of habitat, hedges, trees, that sort of thing, the things that are vulnerable within, particularly an arable, but livestock as well, under ELS, trees within a field. You don't plough underneath the canopy, you leave an area underneath and look after the tree, and effectively you get paid money for doing that every year. You also have to do a certain amount of paperwork type criteria, i.e. lay out your environmental plans, what you're going to do with your waste, what you're going to do with your manure, how you're going to make sure that you don't have any problems with pesticides and so on. So the idea is just to bring it all up to a standard. And within that, there are 3 levels of subsidy and therefore 3 levels of environmental effort, if you like. The base level you get paid no extra for, but you have to reach that standard in order to get all of your base level subsidy, and that's called cross-compliance. There's a lot of jargon in this. Includes certain environmental things that you have to fulfil to get your subsidy to start with. Thereafter, you can then enter yourself for ELS or entry-level scheme, and it's designed to be fairly easy to achieve. You then get another small increment of money for doing that, and then if you want to go the whole step, what used to be called the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, which some of our listeners might have heard of, now becomes the higher level scheme, and for that you're talking about much more major environmental projects, capital projects, planting hedges, laying hedges, planting trees, perhaps planting whole woodlands and all the associated things, and you put the whole farm in as a plan for that.
Right.
And once you've entered the farm, and provided you comply with the criteria, these schemes last for 5 or 10 years, depending on which scheme you're in. So you're committed to do that for 5 years once you've started.
So, in my terms, looking back in time, you ploughed your field and you ploughed it to the edges. And that meant that that crop allowed your farm to turn over more money because you sold that crop on the basis of production. Now, essentially, you're going to leave areas of the field fallow so that nothing is produced on them. So you actually turn over less. And so the subsidy is to encourage you to do that.
Put very simply, and there are very complex means for different crops of governments paying their farmers money. But after the war, farmers started receiving subsidy based on the amount of crop grown. So whether the price was artificially held up or they received money per tonne, it was based on the amount of produce you produced.
Was that because we were short of food at that point?
The war had left us short of food and it had left us short of money, so that anything that we could eat or export or both was beneficial to the country. And it was the whole idea was designed to kick farmers on, get them more professional, more intensive, and to, at that time the idea was to basically gear up production in some form.
And so what that meant here was that many of the fields that previously were woodland were ploughed up.
Yeah, we had what was called war ag, which was the start of it, where land was brought into cultivation literally to feed the country, because of course during the war there were no imports. It was very difficult to import food, and resources in terms of labour were scarce because all the menfolk had gone off to fight, so that you were left with the war ag, which provided the money, and you had the land army effectively, who were mostly the women left at home to do the work. And so that was the start of the idea. In the 90s, they started to think that they wanted to change the subsidy more to an area-based subsidy rather than the actual produce-based subsidy. And the reason for doing that was that there were surpluses within Europe of food, and that they reckoned that by putting it more to area, it would try and take some of the reason to just keep hiking yields up away from the farmer. Not necessarily with a great success. And now what they're proposing to do is to steer subsidy more towards environmental benefits. And now, by putting environmental constraints on us, that effectively should mean that we maintain the countryside in a visual and environmental fashion that people enjoy looking at and is good for the environment.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we still receive enough subsidy to stay in business, having had 50 years of being subsidised. The financial implications of taking it away are not easy.
So in your mind, is this definitely the way forward?
In my mind, as a farmer, I definitely think it's the way forward for perhaps surprising reasons. I don't believe in subsidy, saying I don't think it's justifiable, and I think it's distorted the market and has dug us the hole that we're in now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm also well aware that without any subsidy at all, the economies of scale and the prairieisation of the land would be an easy option to go down. Simple economics shows you to the idea that big fields and just production at the least cost. So somewhere in the middle there is a common ground.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with all of the criteria that the government put on these environment. I don't necessarily think that some of the things that they say are an environmental benefit are, but that's nitpicking. On the whole, the idea is right for the countryside.
Right.
We'll hear more about farming subsidies, and what I really want to talk about is the hedgerow. Not the hedgerow, it's the hedgerow.
Hedgerow.
Yeah.
Right.
Phil thinks the hedges should be looked after in such and such a way.
Yeah.
The government thinks they should be looked after in a different way.
And we know the government are really expert on hedges.
We'll talk about that next week. So thank you, Phil. just go and have a beer.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Phil.
Yesterday, Rich, it was quite exciting because Rob came, who works with Alison, and gave us the new list of plants that are available for Wigglies this summer.
That's right.
Do you want to hear them?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Burr reed, corn mint,
Right.
pennyroyal, dog violet, meadow buttercup, maiden pink, lady's bedstraw, cypress sedge, common mallow, wild strawberry,
Nice.
soft rush, great mullein Aaron's rod, dark mullein, wood anemone, they're beautiful,
Yeah.
greater spearwort, wild garlic, ramson,
Yeah.
snake's head fritillary,
Yeah.
bog asphodel, tutson, bats in the belfry, and meadow saxifrage.
Great names, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely names.
My favourites will no doubt be the wild garlic, the wood anemone, and the snake's head fritillary.
Right, snake's head fritillary. We've got those here, haven't we?
We've got those in the garden
Wiggly
already,
garden, yeah.
and they're lovely.
And ramsons are great because, of course, you get great flowers, but you can eat the leaves. It's
Absolutely.
great. Beautiful.
And they don't grow with bluebells.
They don't grow with bluebells, is
They
that right?
don't, no.
Oh, that's interesting.
Alison's in.
Hi, Alison. It's good to see you.
Hello, Rich.
You've just come back from a real adventure.
Yeah, only a little one.
Where have you been?
10 days skiing in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
a little one.
Yeah, hard life.
Yeah, they're off.
Yeah, just popped off.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you had a brilliant time, didn't you?
Yeah, brilliant time, yeah.
Whereabouts in Canada did you go?
Flew into Calgary and stayed in Banff and skied Lake Louise and Sunshine Village.
Oh,
Whey.
wow, what an adventure.
Something's happening with Alison. You know, she's the only Wiggly employee ever, and probably will be forever, to go to America 3 times in 3 months.
Almost certainly.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, they did call me Judith Chalmers when I was out there.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Well, what age were they?
Back to the grindstone, really,
Back
now,
to
I guess.
it, yeah. Cold and wet.
Back to hard work. And you've come in today and you've brought us a lovely-looking, tiny little plant. What have you brought us today?
Sweet violets today.
Sweet violet.
Spring flowering plant. It'll be flowering in the next few weeks.
Right, right.
All the way up till the end of March.
So really, it starts to flower that early.
Yeah.
And what do the flowers look like?
Flowers are little tiny blue flowers, usually hidden under the leaves. Sometimes you can get like a white variation, but most of ours are blue at the moment.
Wow. Somebody once told me that the blue ones smell, but the white ones don't smell. Is there any truth in that?
Well, it might be another variation of violet, but the sweet-scented violets always smell.
So either so
yeah,
if they're white
whatever
or
colour.
blue, they'll definitely
Yeah.
get some scent from them. So where would you expect to see them in the wild?
They're naturally found in woodland setting under a canopy of trees. That's where they're naturally grown. But obviously they grow very well in a garden situation. They spread throughout the forest floor. So you can imagine walking through the woods early morning. They smell absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I bet they do. Fantastic. So they're relatively easy to grow. If you pop them into a garden, they grow quite easily.
Relatively easy, yes.
What sort of area would you look to put them in? Light, dark?
Well, they grow in a shady spot or they grow in a sunny spot in your garden.
Wow.
And they adapt well to both.
So they're pretty versatile then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And violet's supposed to be good for treating colds. Were you going to tell me something about that?
Alison has a cold and really wanted to tell us how violets were good for colds, but we've practised it so much now that it's not funny. But they are, aren't they, Al?
Yeah, they are.
Thank you.
Apparently
Alison,
good.
over and out.
And here's Monty with the weekly Wiggly Wormcast.
Woo!
The Wiggly Wormcast podcast by Monty, a weekly fact on worms. Earthworm burrows are between 3 and 10 millimeters in diameter and serve as channels for plant roots and water drainage.
Thank you, Monty. And here is number 2 interview, Skyped with Jane. Hi Jane, thank you for joining in the Wiggly Podcast with our second ever Skype interview. Are you very experienced in Skype?
I'm a Skype first timer, a Skype newbie. I'm afraid.
Okay, it's good fun, isn't it?
It's very good fun. I'm very excited.
Excellent. Tell me a little bit about you, because I read your blog from time to time, but I know our listeners would like to know more about what you do and why you've now started a blog.
Well, my day job is as Deputy Editor News and Politics for Guardian Unlimited. That's the website of the Guardian newspaper. So my day job is as a journalist. But one thing I wasn't getting to write about during my day job was one thing that I'm very passionate about, which is gardening, specifically organic gardening and my allotment. And so I set up a blog to actually be an outlet for my thoughts about those subjects. And it just kind of grew from there.
Tell us exactly what a blog is, because I look at your blog, but lots of listeners and myself don't understand the feed bit.
Oh, right. Well, all a blog is, in very basic terms, is a website that's got a series of entries in reverse chronological order. In other words, the newest stuff is at the top. That's all you need to know about blogs. Some people describe them as being like personal diaries or web journals, but not all blogs are like that. Mine actually is a bit of a sort of a personal web diary, but some blogs are used for all different kinds of things which aren't really personal style. And the way that it works is that you can go onto my blog and read my latest thoughts, my latest writings, or you can use what's called annoyingly and jargon-heavy phrase, which is an RSS reader, to go and to read the post, which is basically a way of accessing lots of blogs at once on one easy page. Rather than having to go to my blog, you can read it all together on one page with lots of other gardening blogs.
So it's like iTunes for podcasts, but it's something else for blogs.
Exactly. I mean, the RSS reader is a bit of a red herring, really. It's basically it's like a personalised newspaper.
Yeah.
That's the way to think of it.
Yeah. Okay. And your blog is all about your allotment. So tell us about that.
Well, as I say, I wanted to write about what I was doing, growing fruit and veg and sort of trying to be an ethical consumer, and it's kind of sprung out of that. Since I've had an allotment, being a writer, you tend to want to write about these things, and being terribly self-obsessed, as all journalists are. So once I got my allotment a few years back, I started about a year and a half ago to do the blog, because I wanted to record when I was doing things, what worked, what didn't work, and also to get in touch with other people with allotments, because believe it or not, there are quite a few allotment blogs out there. And so it was just a way of having a place to put things like pictures and notes to self about various things that worked and things that didn't work, and to rant about my compost heap and, you know, the slugs that are eating my lettuce and things like that.
And where is your allotment, and what sort of situation is it? How big is it?
Well, my allotment is 5 poles, which, to those of you not acquainted with the archaic measurement system that's used by most allotments, they call them poles or rods or perches. I think they're almost the same, which is about 125 square metres, I believe. So quite small, actually quite small. Probably the size of a small Victorian terrace's garden, I would say.
Yeah.
But plenty enough room to be getting along with when you take over a very overgrown plot. And it's in a small town in leafy Bedfordshire.
And did you have to apply a long time to get the allotment? Because I have a lot of customers who say it's very difficult to actually get an allotment, because lots of them have been built on or, developed in some way.
It wasn't a problem for me. The site that I'm on is fairly well used. There were about 2 plots available when I got mine. And it depends where you live, really, how much in demand allotments are. In some parts of the country, they're crying out for people to take them on. But I work in London, and lots of my colleagues can't get allotments or are on long waiting lists, because obviously in London space is of a premium.
Yes.
So it depends where you live, how easy it's going to be to get hold of one. It's certainly worth, digging around and inquiring around, because some are owned by local councils, but some are privately owned and run in different ways. So you've got to kind of do a bit of rooting around and asking around to find all the sort of hidden away ones.
How long have you had yours?
I've had my allotment now for about 4 or 5 years, I think. And before that, I was gardening in my back garden, but I moved to a house that had quite a small garden and wanted to have more room for fruit and veg, so I branched out, as it were.
How has it developed over that time?
Oh God, it's I wouldn't say transformed. When I took it over, it hadn't been cultivated for many a year. It was covered in brambles, couch grass, thistles. There was something approximating compost heap of many years standing.
Yeah.
So it was a real nightmare job. And in the first year, I did quite badly in a way, and I really struggled, because it's quite hard when you first get going. It's quite discouraging when you clear a bed and then instantly, it seems, the couch grass is back. So it's been a real uphill battle to get it into a state of cultivation. And it's one of those things with having a full-time job, you know, it's very, very hard. It's a hard thing to keep the couch grass away. So it's a constant battle, but it's a fun battle. I can never live up to the kind of the retired gents who are also on the allotment who, you know, have to go up there every day, and theirs are all, I sort of look at theirs with envy. They're sort of tidy, neat plots, and I'm sure they look at mine and think, oh my God, look at the state of that. But, you know, you do what you can, and as long as I get some crops, that's the main thing.
Yeah. How long do you spend on your allotment?
Well, in the summer, I try to go down. I often end up going down every evening, but it can only, sometimes it's only for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm only 5 minutes walk away, so I try to go down in the summer, sort of every other night to do watering, and at the weekend I might spend a few hours down there. Then obviously going into winter time, a lot less time. You know, as it gets sort of colder and nastier, I tend to sort of spend more time doing sort of armchair gardening, reading seed catalogues and things. But obviously there's still stuff to be done, whatever time of year. So it probably goes down to about sort of 2 or 3 hours a week in the winter.
And does this save you going to the gym?
Well, I think it does actually. I mean, you have to be a bit careful, because if you sort of start getting into sort of, you know, double digging and things, and you haven't warmed up, you can actually do yourself an injury.
Yeah.
And sometimes I come back and the one thing I do suffer from is what I call gardener's triangle, which is where you're hot sunny day leaning over weeding, and you get a sunburn from the place where your t-shirt ends, where it's rucked up, to the top of your trousers.
I know, they're very
Gardener's
close.
triangle. You heard it here first. But yeah, I do get a lot of exercise from it. You know, just walking up and down carrying watering cans, it's great exercise, fresh air, and it really does clear the mind after a busy day at work, I have to say.
And I know you've mentioned Wiggly Wigglers on your blog. Are you a customer? How does that work?
I'm a bit of a, well, I can't think what the word is. I get loads of catalogues, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I do order from lots of different catalogues. And I know I've ordered stuff from you before, and I sort of do switch around from different ones, just basically on what I see.
Yeah.
I mean, I know one of the things that I always order is the old slug nematodes from you, and also from a couple of other firms, which are just great. And I've been toying with the idea, maybe you can convince me about this, I've been toying with the idea of a wormery for a long time now, and I nearly got one for my 30th birthday, which would be a really quite interesting present. But I haven't quite taken the plunge, and every time I get your catalogue, I look longingly at it. But maybe you can convince me. I don't know what's holding me back, really.
I think if you were going to have a wormery, I'd have it for your kitchen rather than your allotment. Worms in your allotment are absolutely fine, but an actual worm composting kit would probably not produce the volume that you'll need. So usually our allotment customers have their can of worms at home, and then they'll take worms from that can of worms and feed their compost heap. So
okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah, you don't harm your wormery by taking worms out of it. So I'd probably do it that way rather than having the composter down at the allotment. I certainly have a normal composter, but anyway, we can talk about that again.
That's interesting. I am such a composting evangelist. I really am. I think my one fear with I eat an awful lot of citrus fruit, grapefruit and things, and I know the worms aren't keen on that. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do with all my citrus fruits? That's my concern.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. But worms actually, they've got nothing particularly against citrus fruit as long as you add something to balance it out. So in normal life, eggshells, a bit of lime mix does that. And usually you don't want to produce too acidic a compost. So there is a little bit of compromise, but I also eat quite a lot of citrus fruit, but also bananas, which are fine. And once you've balanced it with all the other things, and a bit of cardboard or shredded paper does the world of good, practically it'll do just about anything. It's a little bit iffy at the beginning, but once your worms are used to the environment, they're pretty resilient.
Once they've had a bit of tough love.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Now I want to ask you about the most exciting thing that I've read on your blog, which is your new book.
Oh yes, that's right. Sorry, I've forgotten all about every word of it. Yes, the book. Well, how could I forget my book? Well, I'm in the middle of writing a book, which is going to be coming out the end of this year, so that's a long way off, but you have to do these things early. And it's going to be about my allotment, and it's not going to be a how-to manual or you must do this, you must do that. It's going to be a bit of that in there. There's going to be a bit of advice and tips and hints and a bit of allotment folklore, but it's mainly going to be sort of a narrative about what I do on my allotment. Not just going to be a repeat of the blog. It's going to be totally different from the blog, but it will be the same kind of writing. So my little scrapes and incidents on the allotment, and it's going to be kind of looking through the seasons, that what happens on the allotment when, and things like that. So it's quite good fun, quite light-hearted. It should be a good read for anyone who's either got an allotment and have one for a few years, or is thinking of getting one.
And for those people like myself who have lots and lots of cookery books but don't do much cooking but really love the idea, just join in anyway, I can imagine that they will really enjoy this book.
Yeah, I mean, there will be, there's going to be a couple of chapters where I talk about harvesting your crops, and quite handily my other half is used to be a chef, so there's going to be a couple of recipes in there, and little sort of various little things that should provide a lot of interest. But it's going to be hopefully fairly amusing as well. I'm not sort of trying to make it too heavyweight, or, I'm not claiming to be, a Monty Don type figure dispensing wisdom from on high or anything like that. It's all going to be very down to earth, quite literally. Should be coming out at the end of the year, in time for the Christmas market.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully Wiggly Wigglers will have some of those, and we'll see how it goes.
Marvellous.
Thank you, Jane, very much.
Thanks,
indeed.
Heather. Cheers.
Phew. Skype number 2 in the bag, or in the can.
Or on the hard drive, even.
Oh, Richard! Technical whiz kid.
That's right, that's me.
Yeah, right. Jesse, before we go, you've been out and about.
I have, yeah, a couple of talks this week. One up at New Radnor, which is between Kington and Rhayader, and another one down at Blockley, just in Gloucestershire.
Gardeners?
Yeah, all keen gardeners, very keen gardeners. About 24 in the group at New Radnor, and about 40, I think, down at Blockley. Really good group, really sort of interactive. We had lots of fun, lots of laughing. Talking about natural gardening, obviously, wormeries and all things wiggly. Any
of them podcast listeners?
No one, unfortunately, was a podcast listener, but I'm hoping, after my attempts to encourage people to subscribe to iTunes and download the podcast, there should well be a few budding podcast listeners in the next few weeks.
But we all know, don't we, listener, that you're well ahead. You are taking your media as you like. You're on a roll. Wiggly Podcast.
Amongst the elite, yeah.
To conclude, if you want to comment, go to my blog, wigglyWigglers.blogspot.com, or email richard@wigglyWigglers.co.uk, or heather@wigglyWigglers.co.uk, or if you want to argue with Farmer Phil about anything,
at all,
probably farming,
yeah, just sort of argue with it.
Just argue. Yeah. pwg@lowerblakemere.co.uk. Lovely to have you listening. I know there's lots of you now, because last week when we just sent you a New Year's card, you were still there downloading away. So welcome to Wiggly's, and we'll see you next week.
See you, folks. Alison, you've seemed to have a bit of a croaky voice this week. Have you got a cold?
Well, yeah, just a bit of a cold, Rich.
Yeah.
Nothing too major, mind.
Well,
It's not a bloke flu or anything,
Oh, right, I see. Yeah,
A what?
A bloke flu.
What's a bloke
Well,
flu?
it's always 10 times worse than what we get.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant that you'd been with a bloke who got the flu.